Rain poured relentlessly, turning the quiet highway into a slick and treacherous path. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the branches as lightning streaked across the dark sky. Emily sat behind the wheel of her unmoving car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Her hands trembled, and her heart pounded against her ribs. The engine had died out of nowhere, leaving her stranded in the middle of nowhere with no signal on her phone. She glanced at the rearview mirror, her breath hitching. The road was nearly empty, save for the occasional set of headlights flashing past in the distance. She needed to get moving. She couldn't afford to be stuck here. Just as panic threatened to consume her, the low rumble of an approaching vehicle caught her attention. Headlights cut through the rain, and a dark-colored truck slowed down before pulling over behind her car. For a brief moment, fear gripped her chest. Was this help, or was she in more danger? The driver's side door opened, and a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out, his military uniform barely visible beneath a rain-soaked jacket. His short-cropped hair and steady posture gave him an air of discipline, but his expression was warm and concerned. "You need some help?" His deep voice carried over the sound of the rain. Emily hesitated. She had learned not to trust easily. But with the storm growing worse and her car refusing to start, she knew she had no choice. She took a shaky breath. "I think my car died." The soldier Jake nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "Let me take a look." Despite the harsh weather, he stepped forward, ready to help a complete stranger. Little did either of them know, this encounter would change both of their lives forever. Jake moved quickly, assessing the situation with the calm precision of someone used to handling emergencies. He opened the hood of Emily's car, the engine cooling down under the heavy downpour. His eyes flicked over the wires and terminals before he reached a conclusion. "It's your battery," he said, wiping his wet hands on his jacket. "It's completely drained. Luckily I've got jumper cables." Emily, still visibly shaken, nodded, her fingers tightly gripping the seatbelt. She hadn't expected to run into a problem like this tonight, especially not on this desolate stretch of road. She had been trying to escape, running from something, and the last thing she wanted was to be stuck in the rain, alone, and vulnerable. Jake worked quickly, connecting the cables to his truck's battery and then to her car's. As the power surged through the cables, Emily's tense body began to relax just a little. She watched him with a mixture of gratitude and unease. The engine sputtered to life, purring gently as it came back to life. Emily let out a quiet sigh of relief. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "I didn't know what I was going to do. I've been stuck here for too long." Jake gave her a quick nod, packing up his cables. "No problem. Just glad I could help." He paused, noticing her distant gaze, the way she kept glancing nervously over her shoulder. He cleared his throat. "Do you want me to follow you home? Make sure you get there safely." Emily hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. After a long moment she shook her head. "I'll be fine. Thanks again though." She gave him a small strained smile before starting her car and driving away, her headlights disappearing into the storm. Jake stood there for a moment, his concern lingering. Something wasn't right, but he couldn't put his finger on it. As Emily's car disappeared into the night, Jake stood by his truck, wiping the rain from his brow. He had just helped a woman in need, but something about the encounter felt off. He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. It was probably nothing. She was just a woman who had run into car trouble on a stormy night. It was a simple enough situation, wasn't it? But then, as Jake turned to head back to his truck, he noticed something that made his instincts flare to life. In the shadows of a nearby tree line, another car sat parked, its headlights off. It was positioned in such a way that it almost seemed to blend into the dark. He could barely make out the silhouette of the vehicle, but something about the way it was just sitting there made his gut tighten. Jake's military training kicked in. He instinctively reached for his phone, pulling up his camera, and snapped a quick shot of the license plate. The car hadn't been there when he arrived, and he was certain he hadn't seen it when he pulled over to help Emily. It was too close to the scene, too still, and too deliberate. His heart began to race, and his mind spun with possibilities. Had someone been watching Emily? Was there a connection between the car and the woman? Could she have been in danger? For a brief moment, Jake considered following her, making sure she was safe, but the rain was pouring harder now, and the road was barely visible in the storm. He hesitated. After a deep breath, Jake dismissed the uneasy feeling in his chest. It was probably just some coincidence, a person waiting out the storm. He shoved his phone back into his pocket and got into his truck, though the strange sense of unease lingered. It wasn't over. It wasn't the last time he'd think about that night. Days passed, and the memory of the stormy night with Emily began to fade in Jake's mind, buried beneath the normal routine of life. But then one evening, as he sat down to catch up on the news, something caught his eye. A local news report flashed on the screen, showing the face of a woman. Jake paused, his finger hovering over the remote, as he squinted at the screen. The sketch of the woman was eerily familiar. It was Emily. The news anchor's voice droned on, but Jake's focus sharpened. Authorities are asking for help in locating a woman who recently escaped captivity. The woman, identified as Emily Morris, was reported missing several months ago. Authorities believe she had been held against her will. She was last seen near Route 12, an area where she was reportedly seen by several witnesses before disappearing. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he listened closely. The highway, Route 12, that was exactly where he had helped her. His mind raced, his eyes darting to the screen as they showed a picture of Emily, looking exhausted and frightened, standing with a police officer. She looked so different from the confident, if nervous, woman he had met. The report continued, explaining that Emily had been held captive by an abusive ex-boyfriend, someone who had been desperately searching for her since she vanished. The authorities believed she had recently escaped, and her car breaking down was likely part of her frantic effort to flee. The realization hit Jake hard. That night, Emily wasn't just stranded, she had been running for her life. Her nervous glances, her reluctance to share details about herself, her refusal to let him follow her, it all made sense now. She had been desperate, looking over her shoulder, trying to escape the man who had controlled her for so long. Jake sat frozen for a long moment, the weight of the situation settling over him. Emily had been in more danger than he had realized. Jake's thoughts raced as he processed the news report. Emily had been running for her life, and he had no idea. The lingering unease he had felt that night suddenly made sense. That car he'd seen parked in the shadows, it wasn't just a random passerby, it had been watching her, waiting. He knew he couldn't just sit back now. He grabbed his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed the local police station. It was a long shot, but maybe he could help. After a few moments, he was speaking with an officer who seemed to take the call seriously. "Officer, I need to report something about a woman I helped a few days ago. Her name is Emily Morris," Jake began, his voice steady despite the sudden rush of adrenaline. "I'm the one who helped her with her car breakdown on Route 12, near the old bridge." He paused, trying to gather his thoughts. There was another car parked nearby, watching her. "It seemed odd at the time, and I just wanted to let you know in case it's connected." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before the officer spoke again, his tone sharp. "You're not the only one to mention that car, sir. We've been investigating a possible connection between Emily Morris and a suspect, a man named Jack Matthews. He's been stalking her for months. We believe he's the one who held her captive. We're currently searching for him, but he's still on the run." Jake's blood ran cold. The name struck him with a sense of dread, though he didn't recognize it. The officer continued, filling him in on more details. "We've been trying to track him down, but he's been careful. We have reason to believe that Emily was trying to escape from him that night. Her car breaking down wasn't just a coincidence, it may have been the thing that almost cost her everything." Jake's mind swirled as he processed the information. That car in the shadows, the man lurking nearby, everything pointed to the fact that Emily had been running from someone dangerous, someone who would do anything to keep her under his control. "I can't believe it," Jake muttered under his breath, his thoughts flashing to Emily's face, to the fear in her eyes when he'd offered to follow her home. The officer's voice brought him back to reality. "We're glad you called. Any additional information you have could help us track Matthews down. Thank you for being vigilant." Jake hung up, his heart heavy with the truth he now knew. Emily hadn't just been in danger, she was fighting for her life. And the fact that she had crossed paths with him of all people was no accident. A few nights later, the calm of Jake's quiet home was shattered by a faint noise that drew him out of a deep sleep. It was the middle of the night, the wind had died down, and everything outside should have been peaceful. but something wasn't right. He sat up, listening carefully. The faintest sound of gravel crunching under tires reached his ears, followed by the soft hum of an engine. His military instincts kicked in immediately. It wasn't the usual traffic he heard passing by on the road. The sound was too close, too intentional. Jake slid out of bed, his heart thudding in his chest as he moved toward the window, carefully pulling back the blinds. The rain had stopped, but the darkness outside felt suffocating. He looked out into the driveway, his eyes narrowing when he saw the silhouette of a car parked at the edge of his property, near the trees. It was dark, with no lights on, but Jake could make out the unmistakable shape of a vehicle that didn't belong there. A chill ran down his spine. The car wasn't just any random vehicle, it was the same one he had seen parked near Emily's car that night, the one lurking in the shadows. His mind raced. Was someone watching him? Was this connected to the man Emily had escaped from? Jake's hand instinctively went to his phone, and without making a sound, he dialed the local authorities. His voice was steady as he spoke to the dispatcher, explaining the situation in a low whisper. "I have a vehicle parked near my property. I think it's the same car I saw a few days ago. The one I reported. I need backup, now." As he ended the call, his senses heightened. He stepped quietly to the door, his body tense as he crept outside, trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible. His eyes scanned the driveway. It was dark, but he could just make out a shadow moving near his fence. Jake's breath caught in his throat. There, near his driveway, was a figure tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in dark clothing. He stood perfectly still, as though waiting for something. The figure's head turned slightly, and Jake felt a wave of recognition wash over him. This was no stranger. This was the man from the news, the one Emily had escaped from, the one who had been hunting her for months. Jake's heart pounded as he moved slowly, keeping his footsteps light on the gravel. The man didn't notice him yet. He was too focused on scanning the area, looking for someone. "Where is she?" the man muttered under his breath, his voice low but filled with rage. "I know you've been in contact with her. Tell me where she is." Jake froze. This was it. The man who had tormented Emily was here, and he believed Jake knew where she was hiding. He had no idea how the man had found him, but Jake knew one thing for sure: he couldn't let this escalate. Without hesitation, Jake took a deep breath and called out, his voice steady but commanding. "You need to leave, now." The figure snapped his head toward Jake, eyes wide with shock, but before he could react, the sound of sirens pierced the night air. Jake's heart leaped in his chest. The police had arrived. The man's expression twisted in anger as he turned to flee, but it was too late. A squad car skidded to a halt in the driveway, and officers rushed out, shouting orders. The man tried to run, but Jake's training took over. He moved quickly, stepping forward and tackling the suspect to the ground with a swift maneuver. It was over before the man could fight back. Within moments, the police had the man in handcuffs, dragging him to their car as he shouted threats and curses. Jake stood there breathing heavily, his mind racing. He had never expected this, never imagined the danger would come so close to his doorstep. But it was over. Emily was safe. The man who had terrorized her was finally in custody. Jake watched as the officers took the man away, his mind still reeling. He had no idea how the man had found him, but it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Emily was one step closer to freedom, and Jake had been there when she needed him most. A few days after the arrest, Jake was sitting in his living room when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, surprised to see Emily's name. "Hello?" he answered, his voice a little hesitant. Emily's voice was soft, but there was an underlying strength in it now. "I wanted to thank you for everything." Jake smiled, though he couldn't hide the lump that had formed in his throat. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what anyone would have done." She paused for a moment, then spoke again, her voice carrying the weight of everything she had been through. "No, Jake, you don't understand. You saved my life. Not once, but twice. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night." Jake's heart tightened as he listened. The words she spoke hit him harder than he expected. "I just helped you with your car, Emily. It's not a big deal." Emily's voice faltered for a moment, then steadied. "It was a big deal. You were my only hope. You were the first person who didn't look at me like I was broken. The first person to help me without asking questions." Jake sat back, letting her words sink in. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. But, what happened? What did he do to you?" Emily took a deep breath before speaking, her voice trembling slightly. I was in a relationship with someone who controlled everything, every part of my life. It was suffocating. I couldn't leave. He wouldn't let me, but I finally found the strength to escape. That night, when my car broke down, I wasn't just stranded, I was running for my life. And when you stopped to help me, I thought I was going to be okay. But then, when I saw him watching, I knew the danger wasn't over. Jake felt his chest tighten as she spoke. He never realized the depth of her fear that night. How much she had been holding on to, how fragile the moments had been. I didn't expect someone like you, a stranger, to be the one to save me, Emily continued. You didn't know me, but you helped me. I'll never forget that. Jake swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling in. I'm just glad you're safe now. That's all that matters. There was a long silence between them, but it was a peaceful one, filled with an unspoken understanding. Emily's voice broke through again, softer now. Thank you, Jake, for everything. You gave me a second chance at life. The words were simple, but they carried so much meaning. Jake smiled, his heart filled with warmth. This wasn't just about helping someone in need, it had changed him too. The encounter had left a mark on both of them, a connection that would last far beyond the night they met. Take care of yourself, Emily, Jake said, his voice full of sincerity. I'm just glad I was there when you needed me. And as they hung up, Jake leaned back in his chair, reflecting on how a simple act of kindness had led to an unexpected bond, one that neither of them would ever forget. Jake sat in silence, staring out of the window as the rain began to fall again, soft and steady. He thought about the events of the past week, how one simple decision to stop and help had set off a chain of events that changed everything. If he hadn't pulled over that stormy night, what would have happened to Emily? The thought weighed on him, but the truth was, he didn't need to wonder anymore. Emily was safe. The man who had tormented her was behind bars, and she was finally free to start over. Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. It wasn't just that he had helped someone in need, it was that in that moment, he had been part of something bigger, something meaningful. A small act of kindness had saved a life. As he resumed his life, the memory of that night stayed with him, a constant reminder of the power of compassion. The mysterious woman who had appeared on that stormy road had left a lasting impact on him, and Jake knew he would never forget her, or the way her courage had inspired him. He smiled softly, knowing that sometimes one good deed really could change everything. Thank you so much for watching this story. We hope it touched your heart as much as it did ours. Sometimes, a simple act of kindness can change someone's life in ways we can't even imagine. Emily's journey reminds us all of the power of compassion and how we can make a difference, even when we least expect it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share it with your friends. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the story, so please drop a comment below and let us know what you think. And if you want to hear more heartwarming, suspense-filled tales like this one, subscribe to our channel for more stories that will inspire and move you. Thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, stay kind, stay safe, and keep spreading positivity.